I had spent my entire life serving God, yet I never truly felt Him. I prayed, fasted, confessed my sins, and followed every rule, every tradition, every sacred duty assigned to me. I whispered the words of Scripture daily, knelt before the altar, pressed the rosary beads between my fingers, but my soul remained silent. Others spoke of hearing God's voice, of feeling His presence in their hearts, but I never did. I waited for a sign, a whisper, a touch of something divine, but it never came. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. People called me faithful, devoted, unwavering in my belief, but what they never knew, what I never dared to speak aloud, was that beneath my habit, beneath the years of discipline and prayer, there was doubt. A quiet, growing shadow that followed me through every morning prayer, every midnight vigil, every moment I spent on my knees. What if there was nothing? What if, after all these years, all these sacrifices, there was only emptiness? That night was no different from the countless others before it. I sat in the chapel long after the others had gone to bed, the scent of melted wax and aged wood filling the air. The candles burned low, their flames flickering like dying stars. I knelt before the altar, my hands clasped tightly together, and looked up at the statue of Christ. His stone eyes gazed down at me, unblinking, unchanging, as they always had. And then, before I could stop myself, the words escaped my lips. "If you are real, show me." I had never spoken so boldly before. The words tasted like betrayal, like sin. I held my breath, expecting anything to happen. A flicker of the candles, a whisper in the dark, a warmth in my chest. But there was nothing, just silence. I exhaled slowly, my chest heavy. Perhaps this was faith, serving without knowing, believing without proof. Perhaps I had been waiting for something that would never come. I rose to my feet, my knees aching from the cold stone floor, and blew out the last candle. Darkness swallowed the chapel. I returned to my small room, pulled the thin blanket over myself, and closed my eyes. Sleep came slowly, my mind drifting through memories, through doubts. And then, something changed. The air thickened. A pressure settled over me, subtle at first, then growing, as though unseen hands were pressing down on my chest. A low hum filled the room, vibrating deep within my bones. My breath hitched as shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting, writhing, moving without light. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, trapped beneath something invisible, something watching me. A whisper echoed in my ears, not a voice, not words, but something I felt inside my soul, a presence. The room around me dissolved. I was no longer in my bed, no longer in the convent. Before me rose something impossible, an endless library, towering shelves stretching infinitely in every direction, curving into the horizon, disappearing into a void beyond comprehension. The books lining the shelves glowed softly, humming as if alive. The air held a weight, thick with something ancient, something powerful. A voice rang out behind me, clear and steady. "Sister Agatha." I turned, though I did not remember moving. A figure stood before me, cloaked in white, his presence commanding yet calm. His face was neither old nor young, neither human nor entirely otherworldly. He radiated something I had never felt before. Certainty. "You have been brought here to see," he said, "to know what you have always feared." He extended his hand toward the towering shelves, and as he did, one book drifted forward, glowing brighter than the rest. A name was etched on the cover in shimmering gold. My name. I did not understand. Not yet. But I knew one thing. This was no dream. The book hovered before me, its golden letters glowing against the endless rows of shelves stretching into infinity. My name was inscribed on the cover, shimmering as if it were alive. I wanted to reach for it, but my hands felt heavy as though an unseen force held them back. The figure in white watched me in silence, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Finally, he spoke. "This is your life," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Every thought, every doubt, every moment of belief or disbelief, it is all written here." A chill ran through me. My life, recorded in ink, laid bare before me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "And why am I here?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "To see," he replied. "To understand what you never allowed yourself to know." The book opened on its own, pages flipping rapidly, each turn sending whispers through the air. I saw flashes of my childhood, my early days in the convent, the years spent in prayer and service. But alongside these moments were the doubts I had buried, the quiet thoughts I never spoke aloud. The nights I knelt in the chapel, whispering prayers not out of devotion but out of obligation. The fear that had always lingered beneath the surface. What if no one was listening? The pages slowed, stopping at a familiar moment. The candle-lit chapel, the statue of Christ, my own voice frozen in ink. "If you are real, show me." A heavy silence filled the space. The figure in white studied me carefully. "You asked for a sign," he said. "Now, you must choose whether to accept it." Before I could respond, the library shifted. The warm glow of the books dimmed, shadows creeping in from the edges of the towering shelves. The air grew dense, pressing against my skin like an unseen weight. Then, from the darkness, came a sound. A whisper, distant at first, then growing, multiplying. It wasn't a voice, not a single entity, but many? Overlapping, murmuring, endless. I turned, searching for the source, but the library stretched endlessly in every direction. The whispers grew clearer. Some pleaded, some wept, some repeated the same words over and over. "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know." My breath caught in my throat. "What is that?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "The voices of those who never chose," the figure said. "Those who remained in doubt until the end." A cold dread seeped into my bones. The whispers were not just noise. They were thoughts, lingering echoes of souls trapped in uncertainty. They had stood where I stood now, faced the same choice, and failed to act. The realization sent ice through my veins. The whispers pressed closer, filling the space, growing louder, desperate. I felt them clawing at the edges of my mind, as if urging me to join them. The figure in white took a step forward, his presence cutting through the suffocating air. "You are running out of time," he said. "You asked for truth, now you must decide." The book before me glowed once more, its pages waiting. The whispers swirled around me, pulling me in one direction, while the figure's voice called me toward another. And for the first time, I understood that faith was never something given, it was something you reached for. The whispers grew unbearable, 1,000 voices pressing into my mind, each carrying the weight of doubt and fear. They weren't simply sounds, they were thoughts, memories, fragments of lost souls who had never chosen, never believed, never allowed themselves to know the truth. They clawed at me, pulling me toward the endless void between the shelves, their desperation like cold fingers wrapping around my throat. The figure in white remained unmoving, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You must step forward," he said, "or you will remain here." I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as though the weight of my entire life had settled onto my shoulders. The whispers pressed closer. "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know." My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned back to the book still floating before me, its pages glowing with a light that seemed almost fragile against the growing darkness. My name shimmered on the cover, waiting. I took a slow breath and forced my hand to move. My fingertips brushed the book's surface, and the moment I made contact, everything shattered. The library vanished, the whispers stopped, the figure in white disappeared. I was falling. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever known, neither painful nor peaceful, just an endless descent into something vast and unknowable. There was no sky, no ground, no walls, only the overwhelming feeling that I was being pulled through space itself. Colors bled into one another, shifting between light and darkness, creation and void. Time lost all meaning. I had no past, no future, only this moment stretching into eternity. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the falling stopped. I stood in a place I could not name. The ground beneath me was smooth, endless, neither stone nor earth, as though it had been formed from pure existence itself. The air was heavy with something unspoken, an invisible force pressing against my skin. There was no sun, yet everything was illuminated. Shadows stretched impossibly long, cast by nothing. The silence was absolute. A presence filled the space, something greater than anything I had ever known. It was not a voice, not a figure, not a light, but something beyond all of it. I had spent my life searching for God, and in that moment I knew I was standing before Him. My knees buckled, my breath caught in my throat, my entire being trembling under the weight of what I could not comprehend. I had prayed every day, whispered His name 1,000 times, yet I had never imagined what it would mean to truly be in His presence. There were no words, no questions, because there was nothing I could ask that He did not already know. Then, without a sound, something appeared before me. A door. It was massive, towering above me, made of something I could not recognize, neither wood nor stone, but something eternal. It pulsed with a quiet energy, as though it had been waiting for me. I knew what it was: a threshold, a passage, a decision. I had spent my life waiting for a sign, and now, standing here, I realized it had never been about waiting. It had always been about whether I was willing to step forward. The door stood before me, immense and eternal, pulsing with something beyond human comprehension. I had no memory of walking toward it, yet I was there, standing at its threshold, my breath shallow, my body trembling, the silence pressed against me, vast and all-consuming. There was no voice, no whisper, no sign, only the overwhelming certainty that I was not alone. The presence I had felt before surrounded me now, filling the very air I did not breathe, pressing into every part of me, leaving no space for doubt, no room for disbelief. I had spent my life searching for God, questioning whether He truly existed, whether my prayers reached anything beyond the ceiling of the chapel. Now, standing here, I knew. My hands shook as I reached for the door, and the moment my fingertips grazed its surface, it opened. Not outward, not inward, but as though it had never been closed at all. A light unlike anything I had ever seen poured forth, not blinding, not burning, but absolute. It was not just brightness, it was truth, existence itself, and as it engulfed me, I felt everything I had ever been laid bare. There were no secrets here. Every thought I had ever hidden, every doubt I had ever buried, every whispered fear, every unspoken hope, it was all known. And yet, there was no judgment. I fell to my knees, my breath stolen by the weight of it all. I had spent my entire life in service, yet never had I truly known what it meant to stand before God. I had spoken His name 1,000 times, yet never had I understood its meaning. I had asked for a sign, but I had never been prepared for the reality of what that meant. I wanted to cry, to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but there was no need. The answers were already there, not in words, not in thoughts, but in something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of my being. Then, from within the light, a figure emerged. He did not walk, did not move as humans do. He simply was. His presence was overwhelming, and yet it brought no fear. I had seen His image in paintings, in statues, in the pages of Scripture, but none of them had captured what I now beheld. He was not distant, not a cold and untouchable deity. He was real, He was here, and He saw me. I could not speak. I could barely breathe. But I did not need to. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I understood that He had always known me, even when I had not known Him. He had been there in my prayers, even when I thought they were empty. He had been there in my silence, even when He had never left. It was I who had refused to see. My chest ached with the weight of it. I wanted to look away, to shield myself from the unbearable love that radiated from him, but I couldn't. There was nothing but truth here, and the truth was that I had been blind my entire life. Tears streamed down my face, though I did not remember crying. I tried to speak, to ask why he had waited so long to reveal himself, why he had allowed me to wander in darkness for so many years. But before the words could form, understanding flooded through me. He had never been the one who was absent. It had always been me. I knelt before him, my body trembling, my mind unable to grasp the immensity of what I was witnessing. His presence filled everything, leaving no space for doubt, no room for fear, only truth. And in that truth, I saw myself as I truly was. Not as Sister Agatha, the devoted servant of God. Not as the woman who had spent her life in prayer, but as the soul that had existed beneath it all. The layers I had carefully constructed over decades. Faith, duty, discipline, peeled away in an instant, leaving me exposed before the one who had always seen through them. The light around him shifted, and suddenly the air was filled with movement. Scenes from my life unfolded around me, not as memories, but as something deeper, more real, as if I were standing inside them once again. I saw myself as a child, kneeling beside my mother, whispering my first prayers with wide-eyed wonder. I had believed then, purely, completely, before I had been taught what faith was supposed to look like. I saw myself at 18, stepping through the gates of the convent for the first time, feeling both excitement and fear, unsure if I was choosing this life for God or because I was afraid of the world beyond those walls. Then the moments darkened. I saw the nights I had spent in prayer, whispering the words, but feeling nothing. The times I had gone through the motions, bowing, kneeling, crossing myself, not because I felt moved, but because I had been taught that faith was repetition. I saw myself speaking to others about God, telling them to trust, to believe, when I myself had spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was simply talking to an empty sky. I had feared the weight of my doubt, but now, faced with the undeniable presence of God, I understood how small my fears had been. More images surrounded me. I saw the people I had comforted, the ones I had prayed for, the ones who had come to me with their pain, their sorrow, their questions. I had given them scripture, had assured them that God was with them, but now I saw what I had never wanted to admit. I had not spoken those words with certainty. I had said them because I was supposed to, because they were the right words, because they were expected. But in my heart, I had envied those who truly believed. I had watched them pray with tears in their eyes, with hands trembling, with voices breaking, and I had wondered why I did not feel what they felt. I saw myself preaching about faith while carrying none of my own. I had believed in the rituals, in the discipline, in the structure, but I had never allowed myself to believe in what was beyond them. I had spent a lifetime looking for God in the rules, in the prayers, in the silence, but never in my own heart. A wave of sorrow washed over me, heavier than anything I had ever felt, not because I feared punishment, but because I finally saw the truth. I had not been abandoned by God. He had been with me in every moment, in every whispered prayer, in every sleepless night. But I had built walls around myself, convinced that faith was something to be earned, something to be proven, when, all along, it had been waiting for me to simply accept it. I fell forward, pressing my forehead to the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of my own blindness. I wanted to speak, to beg for forgiveness, to explain, but there were no words, nothing I could say that he did not already know, and still there was no anger in him, no judgment, no condemnation, only love. A love so vast, so complete, it shattered the last remnants of doubt within me. I had spent my life searching for something that had never been lost. I remained on my knees, my body trembling, my soul stripped bare in the presence of absolute truth. There was no hiding, no pretense, no way to escape the weight of what I had seen. And yet, despite it all, despite the years I had spent doubting, despite the rituals I had clung to instead of real faith, he did not turn from me. His presence did not withdraw. If anything, it became stronger, filling every corner of my being, as though even now he was offering me what I had spent a lifetime refusing to accept. But there was something else. A shift in the air. A deepening of the silence. I felt it before I saw it. An unraveling, as though reality itself was preparing to reveal something more. The space around us changed. The visions of my life faded, dissolving into nothing, and in their place something new took form. It was not memory, not the past, but something else. Something that had not yet come to pass. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. The world stretched out before me, familiar yet distorted, as if I were looking at it through a veil. Cities rose against the horizon, their lights flickering like distant stars. Streets were filled with people, moving through their days, unaware of the presence watching over them. I saw churches, towering cathedrals, small chapels, places of worship where voices once lifted in prayer. But something was wrong. The light within those places had dimmed. The voices that once sang hymns, that once whispered desperate prayers, had grown silent. I saw people standing before altars, but their eyes were hollow, their lips moving out of habit rather than belief. The pews were filled, yet the hearts of those inside were empty. They followed the motions, knelt when they were supposed to kneel, spoke the words they had memorized since childhood, but they did not believe. Not truly. The scene shifted again, and I saw others who had abandoned faith entirely. They laughed at the idea of God, dismissed him as myth, as something the world had outgrown. They built their own altars, not of stone or wood, but of power, wealth, and knowledge. They worshipped themselves, convinced that there was nothing beyond what they could see, touch, and control. They had no need for faith, for the unseen, for anything greater than their own desires. And yet, beneath their laughter, beneath their certainty, I saw something else. Fear. A fear they would never speak aloud, a fear they buried beneath distractions and indulgence. Because deep within, they knew. Then, the world darkened. The sky turned an unnatural shade, neither day nor night, but something in between. A hush fell over everything. The streets, once filled with movement, grew still. The buildings, the homes, the places of worship, all seemed to hold their breath. And then, without warning, it began. I watched as a great shaking overtook the earth. Not an earthquake, not a storm, but something deeper, something that did not touch the ground, but the very soul of existence itself. The people did not understand at first. They looked around in confusion, some crying out, others clutching onto the things they had built, as if wealth and knowledge could protect them now. Then the light began to fade, not just the light of the sun or the stars, but something more, the light within them. One by one, it flickered, dimmed, and went out. The emptiness they had carried inside for so long consumed them, and they realized, too late, that they had severed themselves from the only thing that could have saved them. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes, to unsee what was unfolding before me, but I couldn't. This was not a dream, it was not a metaphor, it was what was to come, and I knew, with a certainty I had never known before, that it could not be stopped. Then, for the first time, he spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in something deeper. It resonated through my soul, filled every part of me, a voice that had always been there, waiting for me to listen. The time is coming when faith will be tested, not by fire or sword, but by emptiness. The world will not be destroyed by force, but by forgetting. And when they call out, when they finally realize what they have lost, many will find that they have waited too long. The vision faded, and I was kneeling once more in that place beyond time, my breath unsteady, my heart racing. I could still feel the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me, an unbearable sorrow mixed with something else, something even more terrifying. It was not a warning. It was a certainty. I knelt in silence, my mind reeling from what I had seen. The weight of it pressed into my soul, a sorrow deeper than anything I had ever known. The world was slipping away, not through fire or war, but through forgetfulness. Faith was fading, not because it had been taken, but because people had let it go. And now, when they would finally realize what they had lost, it would be too late. My hands trembled as I clutched at the ground beneath me, though it was not truly ground, not something physical. I felt stripped bare, my soul laid open, every doubt, every failure exposed before the one who had always been there. I had wasted my life. I had spent it searching for something that had never been lost. I had been given faith, but I had never accepted it. And now, knowing the truth, what was left for me? Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to speak, but what could I say? What could I possibly ask of him? There was no justification, no excuse that could undo what had been shown to me. I had lived a life of ritual, not of belief. I had led others in prayer, yet never truly prayed myself. I had called upon his name without ever truly knowing him. And yet, he had still brought me here, still allowed me to see, to understand. Why? My breath shuddered as I finally found my voice, weak and uncertain. "Is this it?" I whispered. "Is this where I stay?" The presence around me did not waver, did not grow cold or distant. Instead, I felt something deeper, something I could barely comprehend: love. Not the love I had imagined, not the love I had read about in scripture, but something so vast, so absolute it crushed me under its weight. He had seen every part of me, every flaw, every failure, and yet that love remained. It had never been taken from me. It had always been there. My voice broke. "Please," I whispered. "Give me another chance." The words spilled from me without thought, without hesitation. "Let me go back. Let me tell them. Let me warn them before it's too late." Desperation clawed at my throat, not for myself, but for the world I had seen, for the souls that still had time to choose. They don't know, they don't understand, but they will listen. They have to. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead to the unseen ground. "Let me go back." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, without sound, without movement, I felt the answer. Not in words, not in speech, but in something deeper, something that filled every part of me, and in that moment, I knew. I was going back. The moment I understood that I was being sent back, everything around me dissolved. The vastness, the presence, the eternal silence, all of it faded like mist in the morning light. I felt myself being pulled, not with force, not with resistance, but with a quiet inevitability, as if I had always belonged to both places, yet had never truly understood the weight of either. The warmth of his presence lingered for an instant longer, and then it was gone. A sharp, crushing pain filled my chest. My lungs burned as if they had never held air before. A deafening sound filled my ears. Voices, panicked, urgent, calling my name. My body convulsed, hands gripping my arms, pressing down against my chest. My eyes shot open, and the world came crashing back in a flood of sensation. Cold air, harsh fluorescent lights, the distant beeping of machines. The smell of antiseptic, of something sterile yet laced with the faint trace of incense from the chapel beyond these walls. Shapes moved around me, blurred and frantic. I gasped, my lungs dragging in a breath so deep it felt like my first. The faces above me were wide with shock. A doctor, his hands frozen mid-matcher, stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. A nurse clutched at the cross hanging from her neck, whispering prayers under her breath. The other sisters stood in stunned silence, their hands clasped as they watched in horror and awe. Someone sobbed. Someone whispered my name, as if they were afraid saying it too loudly would shatter whatever fragile moment this was. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice barely more than a rasp. "She was gone," one of the doctors muttered, his voice hollow, disbelieving. "Her heart stopped for..." He cut himself off, as if saying it out loud would force him to reckon with what had just happened. I tried to move, but my limbs were weak, unresponsive, as if I had been separated from them for too long. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the impossible weight of what had happened. I had died. I had seen what lay beyond, had stood before the presence I had spent my entire life searching for, and now I was back, trapped once more in the fragile shell of flesh and bone. But nothing was the same. I was not the same. I turned my head slowly, my gaze finding the small wooden crucifix on the wall. The same one I had prayed before 1,000 times, whispering words that had once felt empty. Now, for the first time, I understood. Not because I had been given proof, not because I had seen, but because I had chosen to believe. I had been given a second chance. But the world I had returned to would never be ready for what I had to say. The days after my return felt unreal, as if I existed between two worlds, no longer fully belonging to either. My body was weak, my movements sluggish, my mind struggling to reconcile the weight of what I had seen with the reality I had come back to. The sisters surrounded me with care, whispering about miracles, about God's hand reaching down and pulling me back from death. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They believed in resurrection, in scripture, in the distant past, in the stories passed down through generations, but not here, not now, not in the quiet halls of our convent. They avoided asking me what I had seen, as if afraid of the answer. At first I tried to keep it to myself, letting the enormity of it settle in my chest like something too sacred to be spoken. But the weight of it was unbearable. I had been sent back for a reason. I had been given a second chance, not for my sake, but for theirs. For everyone who still had time to choose. I had seen what was coming, and I could not remain silent. So I spoke. I told them about the Library of Souls, about the whispers of those who never chose, about the future I had seen, the fading faith, the emptiness that would consume the world. I told them of the presence I had stood before, of the love so vast it had undone me, of the truth I had spent my life fearing to accept. I begged them to listen. They didn't. The first reaction was shock, followed by uneasy glances, by hands tightening around rosary beads, by careful, measured words spoken in voices lined with hesitation. "You were not well, Sister Agatha," they said gently. "You were gone for several minutes. Perhaps it was just a dream." The doctors were more certain in their dismissal. Oxygen deprivation, neurological trauma, a natural reaction to the body shutting down. They had scientific words for something they could not understand, for something they were too afraid to believe in. But I had seen the truth. I tried again. I spoke to the Mother Superior, to the priest who had come to visit, to anyone who would listen. The response was always the same. Concerned eyes, lowered voices, hands resting too gently on my shoulder as if they feared I would break. They weren't rejecting me outright, not yet, but I could feel it shifting. The way they watched me, the way the air in the convent grew heavier with each passing day. Then came the warnings. Perhaps it would be best to rest, sister, to pray, to reflect in silence. You have been through a great ordeal. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. Faith does not need visions, Sister Agatha. It is enough to trust. But I had seen. I had been given a vision, not for myself, but for them. And yet, the more I spoke, the more they turned from me. What I had seen did not fit into their safe, structured understanding of God. They believed in miracles, but only the ones that had already happened, the ones written in books, the ones that did not force them to question their place in the world. And so, I became an outsider among my own. I had returned, but I was alone. They stopped listening. They turned away, spoke in hushed voices when they thought I could not hear. They treated me with kindness, but it was the kind reserved for the misguided, the ones who had lost themselves in delusions and needed gentle correction. They wanted me to be silent, to pray, to reflect, to let go of whatever I believed had happened, but I could not. I had seen too much. I had been given something that could not be ignored, and whether they believed me or not, I knew there were others who still had time to choose. So I am speaking to you now. You may think this is just a story, just the ramblings of a woman who was too close to death and imagined something that wasn't real. You may tell yourself that what I saw was only the result of a dying brain clinging to consciousness. You may dismiss me, just as they did. That is your choice, but I ask you this: why are you still listening? If you truly believed this was nothing but a fantasy, would you still be here? Or is there a part of you, a quiet part buried beneath doubt and skepticism, that wonders if it might be true? I spent my life as a servant of God, and yet I never truly believed. I followed the rituals, whispered the prayers, spoke the words of faith, but my heart remained closed. I was so afraid of being wrong that I refused to see what was right in front of me. And I was not alone. The world is full of people like me, people who go through the motions of faith without ever letting it touch them, people who fear that if they look too closely, they will find nothing at all. And so they choose not to look. They keep their eyes down, their hands busy, their hearts distracted. But time is running out. I have seen what is coming. Not fire, not destruction, not the great catastrophes that people imagine when they think of the end. Something worse. A slow unraveling, a quiet forgetting, until there is nothing left but emptiness. Faith will not be taken. It will be abandoned. And when the world finally realizes what it has lost, it will be too late. So, I ask you, when the time comes, will you be ready? Or will you be like I was, waiting for proof, waiting for a sign, waiting until there is nothing left to wait for? Because the truth is, the choice has always been yours. The question is whether you will make it before it's too late.